friends, welcome back to my channel. This is my October wrap-up, following right off the heels of my September wrap-up because I was so busy the last couple months I never got around to filming September. But we're now basically back on track filming my October wrap-up, so I am just going to get right into it. I read a lot of books this month. So to kick off spooky season, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This takes place in Mexico in the 1950s and follows a young woman named Noemi, who is a glamorous socialite who lives in the big city, and she ends up traveling to an estate in the countryside called High Place after she receives a letter from her newlywed cousin that is really frantic and odd and begging someone to come and save her. The handful of people living at the house are very cold towards Noemi and act kind of strangely, including her cousin, who, when she gets there, doesn't appear to be harmed or in any danger. And Noemi starts having these strange and disturbing dreams, and it's up to her to figure out what's wrong with her cousin and how to help her and what's really going on with this creepy house. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It was pretty darn good. The longer I sit with it, the more I look back on it positively. When I first finished it, I felt a little more lukewarm about it, and it's completely my personal preference, at least at this point, as I'm trying to read more horror and thrillers and try to figure out what I like. This was very well written, like objectively, I think, and did a great job setting the mood and creating this uneasy vibe, and it was descriptive without wasting words. Noemi was a fantastic protagonist. She's smart, she's witty, brave, without being annoyingly so. She has a very distinct personality and way that she behaves, and you're definitely rooting for her the whole time. And there are some characters that are just terrible people and have terrible views, and the author does a great job making sure you dislike them. My issue is just that right now, again, in my reading journey, my inclination is to be more interested in horror that has actual, like, scary creatures and monsters, you know, ghosts and frights, not just vibes and uncertainty. I totally get how people could feel the opposite. I will leave a link to my review of Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall, which I loved. It's like perfection for me in terms of horror, what I'm looking for. It was one of my favorite books that I read that year, and that's the kind of horror that I prefer. And the first over half of Mexican Gothic was of the vibes variety. Nothing really exciting happens, and it's more like a mystery than a horror. So I was worried I would really start to get bored. But all of a sudden, it really takes a turn, and it became more my speed real quick. It was surprising and weird, and I won't say much else. From what I remember, this book doesn't have like the highest Goodreads rating. Like, it's fine, but not super high. Last I looked, it was like 3.6 something, and with like 250k ratings, which is a lot of ratings, and it might be because of the turn that it takes, because, you know, there'll be 2 different kinds of readers that could be miffed. The people who wanted the whole thing to be more like the first half, and the people who wished the whole thing were more like the second half. I was fascinated with the second half, and that's what finally like really pulled me in at that point. So it all for me kind of averages out to a 4. I'm glad I finally got around to reading this one, and I'm interested in reading more by the author. I actually went, and I'll put up some pictures, I went to an author signing. She came to my local community college, and I got I got her her book, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, and I brought my copy of this and Gods of Jade and Shadow and got them all signed. So I have a little sticker here from the event, and then she signed it for me. So that was a really cool event. And then I read Lakesedge by Lyndall Clipstone. And this is a Gothic fantasy about a girl named Violetta. She has a younger brother named Arian who has this strange shadowy magic that he can't control. And one day the Lord of Lakesedge estate named Rowan comes to her village and whisks them both away because he wants to make use of Arian's abilities, and Violetta won't let him go without taking her too. And there's something terrible happening to the lake and the land around it, and Violetta has this strange connection to this god of death in this world called the Lord Under, and she has to find a way to protect the people she cares about. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. And generally it's similar to other 3-star Owl Crate books I've read this year. This is the special Owl Crate edition. You know, it wasn't bad or anything, but it just wasn't anything extraordinary. It did put forth some good vibes. Kind of like the last book, you know, it felt dark and there were some good descriptive imagery and language, but Violetta was a frustrating heroine. Half of the time, she kept rushing into situations and making stupid decisions and doing that thing where, you know, she can put herself at risk, but she won't let others do the same. I didn't feel anything or believe in the romance between her and Rowan. There's no reason for her to like him at all, aside from the fact that they share some trauma. And because this is a YA fantasy romance in a Gothic setting, with a bit of horror elements sprinkled in, like that's why they like each other, because that's what kind of book this is. She just starts having feelings for him for no real reason. So there was alchemy magic, which was kind of cool, but the descriptions of magic definitely get repetitive and just like blurred together after not very long. The coolest and most interesting character was honestly the Lord Under, who doesn't show up a lot, but he does play a role. And he almost feels like out of place in this story because he feels so different from any other character, and I think he's written very well, actually. So in the end, this was yet another fine Owl Crate read. This is the first in a duology. The second book came out last month on my birthday, actually, but I probably am not gonna pick it up unless maybe I happen to find it secondhand somewhere. This does end in a cliffhanger, and I am mildly curious as to what will happen in the second book, but not enough to go out and buy it. I might just read spoiler reviews. Then I finished the audiobook for Inspection by Josh Malerman, narrated by Michael Crouch and Brittany Presley. So what's happening here is basically a years-long experiment in this tall building deep in the woods. I don't remember exactly what state, but it's where this group of boys have been raised from infancy with no concept of the outside world or of the opposite sex. They don't know what a woman is or a girl, have never seen one, never heard the word woman. They don't know the truth of how babies are born. And the hypothesis of this experiment is that these boys will grow up faster, smarter, and just better than normal people without the distraction of the opposite sex. And there's also a second tower several miles away that's doing the same experiment but with girls. They're all about 12 years old-ish, so they're still really young, and you're mainly following a boy named Jay. All the kids have names just after the letters of the alphabet, and you're watching him start to question things about his life, and eventually he meets a girl for the first time named Kay, who was going through a similar situation in her own tower. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it for the most part. The premise was really interesting and hooked me, and there were some pretty intense moments, but the author likes to ramble. Like, honestly, there were parts where he kept talking, or like the character kept talking and talking and talking about something and just like beating it into the ground, and it got really tedious and boring. So this felt a bit too long, in my opinion, because of that. It's not actually that long of a book. The physical book, I took a look on Goodreads, and it's like less than 400 pages, but if there had been like, I don't know, 50, like 100, I don't know, pages less, just less pages, I think that the author would have just been able to cut down on some of the just stream of consciousness and rambling narration, and it would have been better for it, in my opinion. The whole plot also runs on the assumption that none of the kids would turn out to be gay or, you know, non-straight. This isn't addressed at all in the book. It doesn't come up at all or affect the plot, so I don't know, that was kind of a blind spot, I think. The pace speeds up definitely about halfway through when things have like been established and you're kind of watching to see how we arrive at this point, and the ending was pretty good, pretty intense, but overall it was a 3 out of 5. It was still good. I just didn't love the writing style mainly, and it took a while to get to the point, you know what I mean? Then I read Then She Was Gone by Jewell. This is like, I think you'd call it a domestic thriller? Is that what this is? I don't know. I'm still new to thrillers, so I'm not sure about the subgenre. But this is about a woman named Laurel whose daughter Ellie disappeared when Ellie was 15, and this takes place 10 years later, and Laurel has sort of been, you know, floating through life, never really moved on or recovered from what happened, and one day she meets a charming guy named Floyd who sweeps her off her feet and they fall for each other. But things start to get weird when she meets his young daughter named Poppy, who bears a striking resemblance to Ellie in lots of little ways, and it sort of reopens the questions Laurel has had over the years regarding what really happened to her daughter. I haven't read many thrillers yet, so I'll say that a lot of tropes that are probably common in the genre I'm not familiar with or fatigued by yet. So I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I am content in basically whatever book I'm reading, mostly to just let the drama and mystery unfold in its own time. As in, like, I don't spend a significant amount of time or effort trying to figure out mysteries or figure out what's going to happen in a book. I just let the author and characters show me and surprise me. I enjoy that. But even so, like, this was very predictable. I enjoyed it, but it was very predictable. And so, you know, in that, most readers, I think, will be able to figure out at least a good portion of the mystery well before the main character does. And it's more about the tension of watching her figure it out. It's a journey before destination kind of book. So if you want like a real head scratcher, something with twists that you never saw coming, you'll be disappointed with this. But I enjoyed it. I mean, the truth of what happened is horrible. But the brief moments of unease were well done. I felt for Laurel and the way she dealt with what happened. I sympathized. Not that I've experienced anything like what she went through, but, you know, I felt bad for her and was rooting for her happiness. I think this was written well. I liked what Jewell did with different characters and how she presented certain information. And, you know, I'm interested in checking out other thrillers from her. So I know she's kind of prolific. She has a lot of books. So if you have any recommendations by Jewell, then let me know. Then I finally got around to reading this book, which I've had for about a decade. And that is Feed by Mira Grant, also known as Seanan McGuire. So this came out in 2010, and I know I got this at a used bookstore, so I probably got it a couple years after it came out. This is a zombie book. You're following this group of bloggers in their early 20s, led by brother and sister Sean and Georgia Mason. So the blurb on the back here, I'll show you. The blurb on the back of this book is not very accurate or explanatory at all. It tells you basically nothing. And honestly, I think the branding for this is misleading. There are zombies in this book, but you rarely see them. So Georgia and her team are following and reporting on a presidential candidate on the campaign trail. This takes place in America, and there is a growing suspicion that someone or multiple someones might be trying to sabotage this guy's campaign in a deadly way. That's what this book is about without spoilers. And this was a 2 out of 5 for me. This book was insanely repetitive. You are constantly, and I mean constantly, reading about a small handful of things, of elements, over and over again. You're reading about how Georgia has a retinal disease that makes her eyes ultra sensitive to light, constantly. You're reading about how everywhere these people go, they have to take multiple blood tests to make sure that they don't have the zombie virus. And you're reading about how the bloggers run their news site and all of the equipment that they have, and other things like how Sean just lives to poke zombies with sticks in those words. Just all these little details over and over again. And at first I was enjoying the world building because this is a setting where society didn't completely collapse after a zombie apocalypse. It adapted and changed to deal with that fact, and it was interesting to read about that stuff. But the characters just get away with everything because plot. And there's a weird, almost romantic undercurrent happening between Georgia and her brother. The actual plot moved slowly, and there's just really nothing unexpected that happens, except maybe a certain character's death near the end. It was just not a very good book, in my opinion, my personal opinion. There are some good quotable lines about the importance of the news and the truth, and there's some good world building, interesting world building, but this was just bloated with meaningless and repetitive sequences and, contrivances to make things work in a character's favor. I'm glad that I finally read this so that I can unhaul it and I won't be continuing the series. I actually have book 2 that I got a few years ago that kind of prompted me oh, I should read this series because I've had it for a long time. I'm still interested in reading more from Sean and Maguire though. I own Middle Game and it sounds really interesting, so eventually I will get to that one, but this series just wasn't it. And the last book that I finished in October is one that I've been really eager to read since it came out, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. I listened to this as an audiobook narrated by Moira Quirk. And the main thing I remember people saying about this is it's about lesbian necromancers in space, which is technically accurate, but doesn't really say anything about the book. It was very unique, I'll give it that. So in this world, there are 9 houses that practice necromancy. Each of them is located on its own planet, and these houses serve a powerful being called the Emperor. And Gideon is a member of the 9th house, and she serves the house's heir, who is named Harrowhawk Nonagesimus. And one day the Emperor calls all of the heirs to come together and undergo some sort of trial for the chance to become powerful necromancers known as lictors. And Gideon and Harrow despise each other but have to work together to overcome these trials and also to stay alive when people start to die. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. One of the main issues for me, unfortunately, is that I didn't love the audiobook specifically. The narrator was very talented, but it was kind of overacted at times. And the tone of this book is very irreverent and it just took a while for me to get used to. So if you want something more serious and mature in tone, this will probably not be for you. It's snarky and edgy. Like, this isn't a diss, but it's like edgy the way that like emo teenagers are edgy. That was the vibe that I kind of got. And this book, I was on a run when I started it, and this book opens with a dramatis personae, and like I almost like stopped running. The moment the narrator started reading off names, I was like, oh no, I'm going to get these characters so confused. I'm never going to remember all of these little details. There's a reason dramatis personae exist for people to be able to refer to, and I'm not going to be able to do it on Audible. I just think that for me, the experience would have been better all around if I had just read it physically. And I do want to continue the series, but I will definitely switch to reading the physical version instead. And the setting was interesting. And the ending was very exciting and action-packed. Though I was confused by Harrow and Gideon's relationship for so much of the book. Like, I didn't love it, but it does make sense after a certain scene, and their dynamic got more enjoyable to me after that. So overall, I enjoyed the book. I think same with the Silvia Moreno-Garcia book. I think that time will have me looking back on it more and more favorably, but the writing style was just a little hard for me to get into, especially listening to it as an audiobook. So that is it for my October reads. Got a lot more than September now that I was a little more settled into my house. It was still a good, I mean, some of the books, you know, weren't super great, but I still got through a lot of them, and some of them, again, I've had for a long time. I've had Feed for a long time. I've had Then She Was Gone for a long time. Lakesedge I've been holding on to since I got it last year because I specifically wanted to read it during spooky season, and by that time it had been way past spooky season when I finally started to dig into my Owl Crate pile. So yeah, it was still a productive month. But yeah, let me know if you read any of these, if you have a favorite like Silvia Moreno-Garcia book, if you have a favorite Lisa Jewell book. Just yeah, let me know if you've heard of any of these or read any of them or not. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!